core values to valued culture. Here is your host, Will Scott, interviewing another CEO about leading culture in their company.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to another Culture Czars interview where we talk to chief officers, in this case, a chief culture officer from Trend Hunters. And we call this series From Core Values to Valued Culture. And our purpose is to help chief officers create environments where employees love where they work and why they work. My guest today is Jaime Neely, Chief Culture Officer and Czar of Culture at Trend Hunter. Hi, Jaime.
Hello, how's it going?
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Excited to talk to you and learn about the culture at Trend Hunters. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about your company.
Yeah, so Trend Hunter is the world's #1 largest trend spotting platform. And we have over 300,000 articles published to the site, covering everything from new fashion to new tech to new marketing campaigns. And on the back end of that, we spot different patterns through our algorithm, and we're helping some of the world's most powerful brands identify new opportunities, to validate some of their ideas that they have, and ultimately create a more sustainable and prosperous future for them.
That's very cool. And so how many employees have you got there?
So we've just hit 70 employees, which is a pretty big milestone for us. And we're planning on adding about, as many as 30 within the next few months as well.
That's awesome. And are you just based at the one location right now in Toronto?
Yes, we are based out of Toronto. We have some of our writers who are hunting trends for the website. Some of them are based around the world, but the majority of the staff is located in the Trend Hunter office.
Okay, very good. And how long have you been there?
I've been with Trend Hunter since May 2011, so 8.5 years.
So you must have been like number 10 employee or something.
I think it was maybe number 7.
Okay.
I've really seen the company evolve from when we were just an online magazine to now kind of this consulting business model that we have.
Yeah. So I'm excited because I'm sure it's going to be a more common trend, and I'm sure you're not the only one, but you are, I think, the first podcast attendee of the Culture Czars podcast with the title of Chief Culture Officer. So how did that come about? When did you first get that title?
So when I first joined Trend Hunter, I started out as an editorial intern. So I was one of the employees who was doing research for the website, finding new trends, and kind of packaging that in a way that our clients could consume. But as we started to grow, we started to add a few more departments to the organization, and we realized that we didn't really have anyone kind of heading that up, anyone ensuring that we're going about this in the most strategic and effective way possible. And my CEO, he wanted us to do peer feedback with one another. He said, you know what, we get a lot of feedback from our managers, but I think it'd be useful for people who work so closely together in a small team to hear some of the feedback that some of their colleagues might have. And I was particularly interested in this, so I actually volunteered to organize that whole process. And it was successful, and kind of since then, my hat has changed, and it's now been more culture focused. So I was kind of straddling the editorial department and some of these culture initiatives for a while. And then as we hired some more people and there was someone to take on my responsibilities with the editorial side, I fully became immersed in culture.
Yeah, well, I think it's very cool. I think it's great that obviously the CEO and Trend Hunters in general is putting a lot of emphasis into culture at the organization. And you've been successful, presumably, at least in part, because of the way you're embracing culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a priority for us. And the majority of our employees are millennials. And millennials bring just such a different set of expectations, motivations, and desires to the workplace. So it was really important that we created an environment that aligned to that and kept them engaged and ultimately committed to the organization.
Yeah. So what do you think about when we talk about culture? How would you define culture, I suppose?
So culture, the word culture, it's very buzzy these days. And I think that there is a misconception that culture is synonymous with this idea of fun, and that a good culture is one characterized by fancy employee retreats or lavish catering or
Yes.
stocked beer fridge. And while those certainly play an aspect, play a role in creating a strong culture, it's really about creating a group of employees who feel engaged, who feel that they have purpose, and who are motivated and excited about the work they're doing. They feel a personal connection to the company, and they're really bought into what the team is trying to do.
That's a great definition. I quite agree. And when you say about purpose, I mean, how do you give your employees purpose there?
Well, for us, it is a little bit, it's not easy, but we definitely have it easier than some large corporations that have, thousands of employees. Because we are 70 people, we can communicate pretty effectively and often the change in strategy, why we've made certain decisions, and which really, paints a clearer picture for people into where they fit into that strategy. And we have a very strong mandate that if you're going to assign or have someone do something, it has to be playing a role in something. It has to be contributing to a bigger goal or vision of the company, whether it be departmental or even company-wide. People need to know why they're doing something, and they need to know kind of how it plays into the bigger picture.
Yeah. And how are you just sort of describing the why in terms of what you do for your clients, in terms of the purpose there? How do you help your clients?
Well, ultimately, we help them find new ideas that inspire new products, new services, or even new businesses. So for us, that purpose it's very strong. And whether it's our editorial team that's creating the content that is going into these trend reports that our clients receive, or whether it is our sales team helping them see how we could be beneficial within their own kind of strategy and plans for what they're trying to do. And a lot of the clients we work with too, they are looking to become more involved in CSR. So we're actually helping them with some of those initiatives that are backed by social causes. So there is a lot more meaning behind a lot of the research that we do for our team.
Yeah, that's very cool. Is there a certain story that you like, or a certain case study or example that you guys like to talk about or think about when we talk about when Trend Hunter talks about how you're adding value for your clients, purpose?
I think in general, because we have a culture that's very open. We like to celebrate wins, big and small, but we also like to talk about things that didn't go well. We like to not necessarily celebrate them, but give them some time to marinate and to learn from them, and to ensure that we're moving forward in a positive way. But because of that, our employees feel that they feel that they can take chances, that they can try new things, and that they're going to have their manager and their team's support. So that plays a huge role with how many of our employees, especially the client-facing ones, interact with our clients. They are motivated to go above and beyond to provide that extra value, or to do that extra bit of work, or custom effort that might not necessarily be something we traditionally offer in our service. But because we have such an open culture, our employees are very willing to experiment, and it ends up creating new best practices internally that we're able to use with our clients.
Yeah, very cool. So how would you describe the culture at Trend Hunter?
The culture at Trend Hunter, it's very, and I know I just said, culture is not supposed to be synonymous with fun, but it's very fun and energetic and lively here. People are very close to one another. It's very much like a family feel. We're very supportive. Each department has a pretty strong sense of what's going on within the other departments. So it's very natural and exciting when something positive happens for another department. Everyone's very supportive of one another. We also, our culture, we like to move quickly. We have tons of ideas, and we're always looking to experiment and to try new things.
So have you actually used core values to define your culture?
We do. So we actually have 7 core competencies. So these are kind of how we evaluate not only an employee's performance, but we also have these trickle down through things like our rewards program. So we have a peer nominated rewards program where employees can nominate colleagues, managers,
Great.
really anyone in the company. And when you nominate someone, it has to be tied to one of our core values. So it really reinforces and emphasizes what we value as an organization.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I definitely recommend having a program for nominating people who, as I call it, when you catch them committing a core value, to have a nomination process that lifts
Absolutely.
that behavior. Well, what's an example of one of your core values?
So we actually we have 7, which is, for some people, they say that's quite a lot. But when it comes down to kind of our performance model, it works out quite nicely, and we feel that it does a comprehensive job of kind of covering all of the ideal behaviors that we would like to see from our employees.
Yeah.
But one of them is speed and flexibility. So being able to move very quickly and being able to, multitask and essentially kind of tackle the task at hand without waiting for someone to kind of hand you a set of instructions. A lot of the things we're doing at Trend Hunter, we've never done before. There isn't necessarily a playbook. So a lot of the time, the onus is on the employee to kind of kickstart projects, even if they might not feel that they're the number one person for that job, or they might not have the necessary qualifications. We always encourage our employees to kind of rise up to the occasion. So speed and flexibility definitely kind of empowers people to do that.
That's great. That's great. So how did you come about? Let's just stay with that one there.
Yep.
Did you kind of go through a process that determined, yeah, that's the kind of organization we are, that's the kind of people we are, we're all about speed and flexibility, and therefore that should be one of our values? Or do you remember how it came about?
So yes, actually. So our CEO, Jeremy, he used to be a consultant. And when he first started Trend Hunter, it was 2007. And there were only 2 employees. And then there were about 4 over the next 3 years. Yeah. And he had kind of carried over some of the core competencies that he used in his consulting world and kind of modified them to fit within Trend Hunter's culture a little bit more specifically. So we had 5 originally that he had kind of ushered in. And then as we became a much bigger organization, we did some modifying to those to make sure that they really aligned to kind of what we were doing. But essentially, the core values really kind of encourage and guide employees to keep that entrepreneurial mindset, even as we're growing as an organization. So we really try to keep that small, agile feel, even as we're getting bigger.
That's great. Well, what's another of your core values?
We have entrepreneurial initiative. We have proactive problem solving. We have inclusive leadership. We have coaching mentality, which is all about kind of coaching not only your direct reports, but also your peers up to, kind of pushing them to be the best that they can be, and being open to feedback that might not be coming at a scheduled time. So just kind of always being open to learning and improving. And then one of our newest core competencies is assume positive intent. So this is that, you're always assuming someone had, your best interests in heart, and that they weren't acting in, a malicious way. Just kind of, it's essentially giving people the benefit of the doubt and kind of using that and hitting pause before, you're getting into a tense or maybe heated scenario.
Yes, nice. So you said that was recently added. Was there a reason for adding that?
As we, there's growing pains with a smaller organization. We've gone through many different rounds of growing pains as we've added new departments, as we've expanded into new office spaces. There's always these unpredictable growing pains you'll experience as a newer organization. And we found that there were a lot of competing interests. We hadn't done a great job at really aligning kind of where we were 3 or 4 years ago. And, it created a little bit of tension between different departments, feeling that, what they were trying to do was more of a priority than what other people were trying to do. So there was really a lack of alignment, and it kind of led to some communication breakdowns. We found that assume positive intent can be really, really helpful with that, whether you're reading an email that gives you kind of a knee-jerk reaction, or whether you are, even in person in a meeting. It's kind of trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes and really embracing a different perspective other than your
Yeah, that's great. So I also heard you mention coaching mentality. So let's
Mhm.
pick that one. I mean, do you find that people actually use these words in a sort of daily interaction? Would somebody ever say, "Hey, that was, I don't know, a great coaching mentality you just demonstrated," or
Yeah,
is it encouraged in the meetings? I don't know. How are you?
yeah. So I'd say it's not we're not at a place where it's as organic as someone just kind of throwing it out
Mm,
as a compliment. Again, we do use. You could nominate someone through our rewards program for coaching mentality, and you'd have to give a little
oh yeah,
mini
right.
mini not a speech or anything, but you have to say a few words in front of the office as to how this individual you've nominated has demonstrated coaching mentality, really outlining kind of how they embodied that competency. And then it appears as well in our mid and end of year performance reviews. So it's not something we're using technically every day, but we do use these core values as a feedback tool. So let's say that situational feedback has to be given periodically throughout the year. That happens all the time, at least it should happen. And we can anchor some of our feedback in one of those competencies, which again does a great job of just kind of really reinforcing and emphasizing that these are what we prioritize at the company.
Yeah, so I'm glad you're actually that person stands up in front of the company and effectively tells the story. They don't just kind of get the
Exactly.
award, but they tell the story about why, and
Yes,
that helps reinforce that particular value that
it
they're
does.
talking about, right? It helps sort of demonstrate the behavior to all the employees, and new employees get it, and that's
Yes, it's really good for new employees who,
yeah,
of course, when they go through their onboarding training, there is a session on our core competencies, our performance model, the behavior we expect from each of those. But it can be challenging when you've just joined a company, and it's very useful to have fellow colleagues, especially those who are senior to you, discussing how those competencies have been used in a real world setting. It makes it a little bit more real. People are able to kind of connect the dots and see how that really plays out in the day to day in the office.
yeah, yeah. That's excellent. How often does that meeting happen, by the way? Is that weekly or monthly or?
So the rewards kind of announcements, that is part of what we have beer Fridays every week. So the
Okay,
office will come together at
yeah.
the end of the week, yeah, and everyone will share kind of their highest value add. So you get kind of a little bit of a snapshot from
Mhm.
each department and some of the employees you might not work with as often. And then the rewards announcements, those happen usually twice a month. So we don't do it every single week, but sometimes we'll have an
Okay,
influx depending on what
yeah.
projects we're working on. But yeah, we try to spread them out a little bit so that the novelty doesn't wear off and that people are still kind of excited to hear about the rewards and also to receive them.
Yeah, yeah. No, that sounds like a great frequency actually every 2 weeks on that. And it's
Mhm.
fun. Yeah, we used to have one of my companies, we used to have something called beer o'clock, which
Zero
was
o'clock, yep.
which is 4 o'clock on a Friday also, where at the end of the week, hey, let's take a break and catch up. But also
Yeah,
just great for culture and sharing the stories. And I like
yeah.
what you said there. So you actually get everybody to talk about what's their highest value add for the week.
Yeah,
That's
so yeah, we call it the HVA, and everyone. It doesn't take long. We even sometimes say, okay, speed round, because with 70 people, it can take
yeah,
can sometimes take a little bit of time. But people usually come prepared with what their HVA
yeah.
is. It could be that they signed a new client. It could be that they had a great call with a client. It
Mm.
could be they had a presentation, or they just had an internal win. They are implementing a new strategy. So it's a really nice kind of quick way to get a little bit of an update from some of the people who you don't see every day.
So who runs that meeting?
So it's pretty much self-run. It's been
Okay.
something though that has it's been going on since our CEO Jeremy started
Hmm.
the company. So it's not something that people have to really facilitate. We just kind of everybody knows that at 4:30 you grab your beer, you're in the lunchroom, and we it's very much just a routine. We just kind of get right into it.
Yeah. Okay. I wondered if it was the job of the chief culture officer. That
Well,
was.
I mean, if there's changes or if there's
Yeah.
enhancements that we're making to it,
Right. So you
definitely.
make announcements.
Yeah. So, and we also use that time as well to make any important team announcements, whether it be about an employee transition or just something that the team needs to know. We
Yeah.
also obviously use email to communicate some of those, but some messages are better delivered in person. So we'll use that time to do that as well.
Yeah. So does anybody get, is there any kind of actual award given, or is it simply the shout out that they get in that
Oh
environment?
no, we definitely have very kind of specific rewards that we give out.
Oh,
So sometimes it could be, coffee for a week. Sometimes it could be a lunch out on Trend Hunter. It could be a night out. So you have a certain amount of money to expend.
okay.
You go out for dinner with like your partner or something. Sometimes it could be, tickets to a sporting event.
Oh,
We also really like to give employees subscriptions to different, monthly boxes. So we have some employees who get, a ball of wine every month of the year sent to them,
oh.
or sometimes we
So
even have like
how do you,
Japanese snacks or something. Yeah, so it's we try to we try to personalize them based on the individual,
I see,
and
that's how you decide.
yeah,
Yes.
and also too depending on kind of how big the reward is, because we encourage employees to nominate people not just for big kind of fancy high profile projects, but also for some of that smaller work that might go unnoticed but definitely plays a part in helping us achieve our
Yeah.
goals.
Oh gosh, this is fascinating. So how do you determine if it's a big one versus a smaller award? Like, I don't know, it sounds like tickets to a sporting event might be a lot more than coffee for a week.
Per week. It usually just depends on the nature of kind of what someone has been nominated for.
Okay.
Usually, I'm on the receiving end of those nominations, as is my colleague Yana, and if need be, we'll kind of sync up about it. But usually, it's pretty clear based on the context of the nomination how kind of not important, but how kind of impactful one project was versus another. Especially if the length of the project. Sometimes we'll have rewards come in for people who are wrapping up a huge 3-month project versus someone who subbed in on a call for one call during a week or
Yeah.
something. So it definitely varies, but we like to keep that kind of line open for everybody to nominate, just because it's a nice way to be able to recognize your peers.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. What about the interviewing process? Are you using the core values at all to screen folks that you're hiring? I'm sure you are, but tell us how you do it.
So we actually have kind of two parts to our interview. We'll have kind of that entrepreneurial interview, which will evaluate them on kind of their quick thinking, their speed and flexibility. We'll give them a variety of kind of maybe situations unique to the specific role we're hiring for, just to see kind of how they might respond and react to that. A lot of times they are client specific situations, and that usually kind of paints a clear picture of whether or not they've got kind of a similar mentality. But also, we're not necessarily opposed to a different mentality, because you can get into kind of a rut where you're hiring constantly for culture fit.
Yeah.
And that kind of means you're getting the same people coming into the organization. And you're not really going to have any new ideas or interesting discussions if you're constantly hiring for that person who's going to fit into the company. So we like to look for culture add as well. Someone who doesn't necessarily look like us, doesn't necessarily speak like us or think like us, but offers kind of a different area of expertise, and they can essentially really shake things up. And we find that that's very important to focus on throughout the hiring process, because it can be obviously tempting to continuously hire people that you think you could get along with or you see yourself hanging out with. But ultimately, sometimes that isn't the best decision for the company.
Okay, yeah, I like that. So not only culture fit, but also culture add.
Yes.
Although I'd just like to make the point for the listeners that it's totally possible to have a very, very diverse group of people, and diverse in all kinds of ways, but still sharing a common set of values about how we work together,
Absolutely.
how we approach our clients and that. Yeah.
So, and we one of our questions is, could you describe your ideal work environment? And we have them list 3 to 5 characteristics, and usually that's pretty indicative if this is going to be a fit for them as well, right? Because just as someone could be a fit for us, we might not be a fit for them, and what their objectives and kind of preferences are.
Yeah. So how do you measure? Well, first of all, let's go to you mentioned how you use it for the I don't know if you call it a check-in or personal review, but you did say that you're using it in terms of the assessment of the people. So how do you use the core values to assess your current employees?
So we have a mid-year feedback that is curated by a direct reports manager, and they will evaluate an individual. They'll give a score from -2 to +2 on every single core competency. So 0 being, you're kind of right where you should be, you're meeting expectations. Anything below 0, you're below expectations. Anything above 0, you are above expectations. So we have the managers give an individual score for each of those competencies, and then they're also responsible for then calling out some specific incidences or projects where those competencies or values were really demonstrated, or where maybe they weren't demonstrated as much as we'd like.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
And
So as an employee, I would know how the company believes I am measuring up to the 7 values, and I might be doing great in 3 or 4 of those, but room for
exactly.
improvement in some of the others.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the end of year assessment, which is a bit longer, we actually do that in the form of an employee self-evaluation. So they're responsible for scoring themselves on those core competencies, as well as a few other activities and exercises we have them do. But it's very interesting and self-reflective for them to actually think back on their year, as well as their mid-year, to evaluate kind of how they've improved on those competencies, and also for setting goals for the year ahead.
Yeah. And then what about this idea of measuring? Do you think you can measure culture, measure the strength of a culture?
I think that you can measure aspects of a culture. I think it's tough to have maybe one universal metric for culture, just because each culture is going to be so different within different companies. But what we try to do at Trend Hunter is we try to track engagement through a variety of surveys that go out throughout different parts of the year. And these surveys get at how people are they feeling motivated? Are they feeling excited about the work? Do they feel that they're still learning something? Is there other areas of the business that they're interested in and they might want to pursue? So there isn't one universal metric for culture. Each culture is going to prioritize different things based on their own goals, also the employees that they have within their company. So it's more so about finding what is important to your culture, and then finding ways that you can measure that.
Sure. But you're doing a survey then. How often do you do that?
We do that twice a year. This is something that we're looking to do it much more frequently, just because to truly track engagement and culture, you need to be doing it, I would say, at least monthly. And it doesn't need to be a long survey. Some of the options we're looking at, they're going to be 5-question surveys that take less than 5 minutes for employees to fill out, but it will give them that platform and that opportunity to share anything that maybe isn't going super well, and then for us to hopefully collect some data on, is there a certain month of the year where employees do feel less engaged or excited?
Cool. And so you do get an actual measurement from that, though, right? Because I presume
you can. Yep.
Yeah.
Depending on how you frame the questions.
Yes.
If you use an actual kind of a net promoter score too, you're able to actually track those numbers, and you could even visualize them in various charts if you wanted to get super technical about it. But yeah, I'd say the more data you can collect, the better able you'll be to track and actually implement new things to help with this.
Yes, no, that's great. So I don't know if we've talked about this yet, Jamie, but I wrote a book called The Culture Fix that came out this year, and chapter 8, I think, is of that book talks about exactly that, the ways that you can measure culture. And yes, surveys is definitely one that you can do several times a year and just get a number or a pulse on how people are feeling from a culture point of view.
Yeah, it's also interesting to survey employees immediately after a project has wrapped up. You're able to collect some interesting data points there, just to see, is this the type of project that employee likes to work on, which can help inform, some of that employee's planning for the rest of the year.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And I guess so. As we come towards the end of this, have you been able to observe, maybe other companies where you feel like, gosh, you wish they invested more in culture, and I guess what kind of advice would you have for them, some company that is struggling with culture?
I think that the symptoms of a bad culture or one that is struggling can be easily misinterpreted as symptoms of something else. Mm-hmm. So companies will be quick to maybe throw money at, not even money, throw resources or energy towards something that isn't actually the problem, because they just don't know. They don't know enough about what the impact that culture can have. And I think people do really misinterpret what culture means. I think they see it as, employee perks and benefits and, giving their teams shiny things, when in reality, studies show that people actually don't really care about those things. They want to feel valued within their role. They want to feel that they're making a difference and that they're actually, working towards something. So culture, you can't create a culture overnight. You can't fix a culture overnight, but culture will exist no matter what. So it's kind of up to leaders within an organization to take charge and to kind of take control of that narrative. And it takes a lot of collaboration with stakeholders, with getting feedback from the people who actually make up your culture. And it's no easy feat, but the benefits, they really do pay off in the long run.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, gosh, I couldn't have summarized things better than that. So you did a very nice job of that. So may I send you a copy of the book, The Culture Fix?
Jen? I would absolutely love that. That'd be great. Thank you.
Good. Well, I'd like to send that to you, and as maybe as a thank you for coming on the podcast. And just any final things that you'd like to say?
I think I kind of summarized it there, but just, culture it's not necessarily just the responsibility of someone with a title called Chief Culture Officer. Everybody plays a role in creating a culture and maintaining it, and it really is an effort that comes from the top and impacts everybody down to the newest member of an organization.
Thank you. That's awesome. Well, as my listeners know, they can hear more great podcasts where I interview people that are doing a tremendous job of managing their culture. And that can be found at culturezaars.com. It's also all the places that podcasts can normally be found. And well, look, thank you for being a part of the Culture Zaars series of interviews. And congrats on your culture and the success that you're having at Trend Hunter.
Thank you. Nice to speak with you.
Thank you so much, Jaime. Jaime Neely of Trend Hunter, everybody. Chief Culture Officer. Bye, Jaime.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe, check us out on the web at culturezaars.com, and we'll see you next time.